They erased your reality one denial at a time and called it love. Have you ever apologized for something you knew was true just to stop the storm? Ever started journaling, not to understand yourself, but to preserve proof of your life? Ever whispered to yourself, I'm not crazy, but said it twice, just in case? This is not insecurity, this is not oversensitivity, this is war. Not the kind that breaks bones, but the kind that rearranges your mind. The kind that replaces certainty with self-doubt and calls it closeness. It doesn't start with screaming. It starts with almost nothing. You're remembering it wrong. That's not what I meant. You're always so emotional. Each line chips away at your knowing, until one day knowing itself feels aggressive. You begin to doubt not just the words in your mouth, but the thoughts that created them. Not just what you feel, but whether you're even allowed to feel it. Because this war isn't fought on battlegrounds, it's fought in bedrooms, boardrooms, text threads and dinner tables. And its objective is simple: make you question the only thing in this world that should have always belonged to you, your reality. Carl Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And when someone refuses to confront their shadow, they'll make you carry it. Their fear becomes your fragility. Their shame becomes your overreaction. Their control becomes your instability. They project what they hate in themselves and call it you. That's not miscommunication, that's psychic colonization. David Reimer lived this truth. Born male, a surgical accident in infancy led doctors to decide he'd be raised as a girl. He wasn't told the truth. The people he trusted gaslit him from birth, not out of hatred, but because they believed their version of reality was more convenient than his truth. He felt it, the mismatch, the confusion, the soul dislocation. But every time he spoke up, he was told it was just a phase, that his feelings weren't real, that the discomfort was in his head. When the truth finally came out, it didn't save him. Because when someone takes your truth long enough, giving it back doesn't always rebuild what was lost. There's a Chinese line from Dream of the Red Chamber. Truth becomes fiction when the fiction's true. Real becomes not real when the unreal's real. Gaslighting doesn't work because you believe a lie. It works because the lie becomes the only reality anyone allows you to live in. But what if the person gaslighting you isn't trying to hurt you? What if they actually believe what they're saying? Does that make it better or more dangerous? Because when someone can't tell their lie from your truth, you're not just fighting manipulation. You're fighting delusion, you're fighting belief. You're fighting love distorted by fear. And that's when you begin to split. Not visibly, quietly. You still laugh at their jokes. Still keep the house clean, still kiss them goodnight. But inside you're keeping a record. Not to win, to survive. Because you've realized something horrifying. It's not just that they lie. It's that you've started needing proof to trust your own thoughts. And still, somewhere deeper than the script, beneath the apologies, behind the smile, you feel it. A flicker, not rage, not even clarity. Just the quiet, treasonous feeling that maybe you were right all along. That flicker isn't dangerous. It's sacred. And that's your soul trying to return. You start rehearsing the truth like it's a speech. You don't just feel something, you prepare evidence for why it's valid. Because you know what's coming. That's not what I said, you're twisting my words. Why are you always so dramatic? So you collect proof, screenshots, recordings, journals. Not for justice, just for sanity. This is not about disagreement, this is about destabilization. Carl Jung warned that when the ego is overwhelmed, it fragments. Not just emotionally, but perceptually. And that's what gaslighting does. It hacks your perception of reality and makes you complicit in the hack. It doesn't scream, it drips. Like water from a faucet you can't quite tighten. One distortion at a time, one small untruth, one quiet correction. Until you start to question whether your memories are just feelings dressed up as facts. This is not just what happened to you. This is what they said happened to you. This is what they told others about what you felt. This is what you eventually started telling yourself. In East Germany, the Stasi mastered this. They called it Zersetzung, decomposition. They didn't arrest you. They'd sneak into your home and move the furniture by a few inches. Switch your sugar for salt. Send anonymous letters to your co-workers about your mental health. They didn't want to silence you. They wanted you to believe you were silencing yourself. They turned perception into paranoia and called it peacekeeping. It worked. People broke, not from violence, from confusion. You begin to wonder, what if I misunderstood? What if I am too sensitive? What if they're just trying their best? And then comes the worst question of all. What if I'm the one doing this to myself? Because that's what gaslighting wants. Not just for you to forget the truth, but for you to become ashamed of ever remembering it. Jung said the psyche is a house, rooms for memory, windows for feeling, doors for connection. In gaslighting, that house becomes a hall of mirrors, every reflection warped. You try to exit, but each hallway leads back to their version of you, not who you are, who they say you are. And after enough time, you stop looking for the door, you stop asking questions. You censor your thoughts before they even leave your mouth. You shrink your needs until they disappear. And the terrifying part, you start calling it love. Because love, in that fog, is anything that doesn't hurt worse. But here's the interruption. Here's the fracture they never accounted for. If they had to lie that many times to make you question yourself, if they had to twist the truth that carefully, that consistently, then your original reality must have been powerful. Maybe the problem was never that you were unstable. Maybe the problem was that your clarity threatened their illusion. And maybe the fog wasn't something you walked into. Maybe it was something they built around you. And if that's true, if your memory is still whispering, if your gut is still clenching, if your truth is still flickering, then the fog hasn't won, not yet, because something in you still remembers the way throughout. You don't wake up one day and realize you've lost yourself. It happens in pieces, in edits, in pauses too long before speaking, in glancing at someone's face mid-sentence to check if it's safe to finish the thought. You start rewriting your reactions before they're fully felt. You smile to soften a truth. You apologize for a boundary. You stay silent so the night doesn't detonate. And the voice that says, maybe I imagined it, it used to belong to them, but now it sounds like you. Carl Jung warned that when we deny the parts of ourselves we cannot accept, those parts don't vanish. They become unconscious, and in that shadow they grow. But the gaslighter doesn't deal with their own shadow. They outsource it. They make you wear it. And what starts as projection becomes possession, not metaphorically, psychically. Your inner monologue becomes theirs. You enforce their lies better than they ever could. You start to gaslight yourself. This is no longer about manipulation. This is about programming. And the longer you live like that, the more fluent you become in your own erasure. You say you're fine, even when you're not. You defend them, even when you're bleeding. You tell others it's not a big deal because explaining this kind of war sounds like paranoia. But it's not paranoia, it's lived disorientation. In the 19th century, a French experiment was conducted on a prisoner. He was blindfolded and told he'd be bled to death for his crimes. They pricked him gently, not enough to draw blood, and then mimicked the sound of dripping liquid. Doctors stood nearby, narrating false symptoms of his blood loss. The prisoner, believing what he heard, what he felt, what he was told, grew pale. His pulse slowed. And without losing a single drop of blood, he died. He was killed by suggestion. By the belief that what was happening inside him matched what was being narrated around him. That's gaslighting at its most lethal. It doesn't need weapons. It just needs you to believe the story they're telling about you. And if they do it long enough, you start to help them tell it. You erase your joy because it might look like mockery. You mute your sadness because it might be used against you. You flatten your reactions until you're emotionally indistinguishable from furniture. Not because you lack feeling, but because feeling has consequences, so you perform stillness. You call it emotional maturity, but really it's fear dressed up as peace. Jung called this psychic fragmentation. The self, your core, your essence gets exiled. The ego adapts, builds a mask, wears the smile, nods on cue. And that mask becomes so practiced you forget it was ever a mask. You perform until you believe the performance. And yet behind all of it, something waits. Not loudly, not confidently, but steadily. It's the part of you that rolls its eyes at their next excuse. The part that clenches when you lie to yourself and call it compassion. The part that whispers, "That didn't feel right." That's not who I am. That whisper isn't weakness. That's your self knocking from behind the wall they built. You haven't lost your mind. You've been living in a hall of mirrors someone else designed. And the fact that you can still hear that knock, that means your truth is alive. That means your memory is intact. That means the prison isn't sealed, it's just disguised as home. And now, finally, you're starting to question the floor plan. There's a point in this war where you stop remembering what it felt like to trust yourself, not just your memories, your motives, your moods. You ask, do I actually believe this, or have I just repeated it enough times to feel safe? You start editing your desires before they reach language. You ask for less, not out of maturity, but out of fear of how your needs will be spun. You shrink not to fit the room, but to avoid being noticed in it. This isn't emotional regulation, this is disappearance. And by the time you realize how far you've fallen, you don't just feel lost, you feel fake. In myth, Persephone was taken to the underworld, not killed, just removed from light long enough to forget what warmth felt like. She ate the fruit of that place, sweet, binding, seductive. And every bite ensured she would return. Gaslighting is that fruit. It offers comfort with conditions. Connection that costs your sanity. Apologies that smell like control. And you bite down not because you want to, but because being believed seems more dangerous than being numb. Carl Jung called this the nigredo, the black stage of the soul's transformation. Not depression, disintegration, the self breaks apart. Not to destroy, but to make space for truth to reassemble. But in this phase, it doesn't feel sacred. It feels like drowning, and no one sees it. Because from the outside, you're functioning. You're doing the dishes, meeting deadlines, replying to messages with emoji hearts. But inside, you're lost in a maze with no thread. You remember who you were vaguely, like a dream half forgotten after waking. And the longer you're here, the more you start to believe this is who you've always been. In Aboriginal Australia, there's a ritual called bone pointing. A curse placed by simply pointing a sacred bone at the victim. The community believes it, the victim believes it. And they begin to die, mind first, then body. One man named Rob fell under this curse. No poison, no physical assault, just belief. He stopped eating, he stopped speaking, he grew pale, he began to fade. Until the elder who cursed him publicly revoked it. He said it was a mistake. That Rob had been cursed in error, that he could live. And within hours Rob rose, ate, laughed. Because the mind that accepts the lie can make it real. But so can the mind that releases it. Gaslighting doesn't just confuse, it curses. It replaces your sense of self with a reflection someone else controls. But here's what they can't touch, with the part of you that never bought the whole story. The part that always flinched when the lie got too close. The part that still remembers what it felt like to belong to yourself. You may feel buried, but you were buried like a seed, not to die, to prepare. And now, deep beneath the frost, your truth is stirring. You don't rise from this with clarity, you rise with questions. Not the kind they asked you to destroy you, but the kind that sound like home. Questions like, what if I wasn't too much? What if they were too small? What if I didn't forget who I am? What if I was never allowed to remember? The fog doesn't clear all at once. First you feel a pause, a flicker. You say something without explaining it. You feel something without justifying it. And for a second you don't flinch. That second is sacred. Because that's where reclamation begins, not with rage, but with remembering. Carl Jung said, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. Gaslighting turns you into a sleepwalker in your own life. But when you stop reciting their version of events and start listening to the quiet protest beneath your skin, that's awakening, that's individuation. It doesn't start with a breakthrough. It starts with disbelief in the lie. You stop saying I'm sorry when you're not. You stop softening the truth until it fits in their mouth. You stop turning your instincts into suspects. And the more you stop, the more you hear it, the voice. The one that never left. The one that got buried under years of gaslit dust. The one that once screamed, then whispered, then went silent. Not out of weakness, but exhaustion. And now it speaks again, not loudly but with resolve. You walk through the house of your mind, the one they said was haunted. And you find a door. The one you were never allowed to open. The one they swore was dangerous. You stand before it not with fear, but with memory. You remember everything they told you wasn't real, every instinct. Every moment you doubted yourself, and were right to. Every warning bell they convinced you was panic. Every truth you swallowed to keep the peace. And then you do something unthinkable. You open the door, and inside there's no monster. No madness, no chaos, just a mirror. Covered in dust, untouched, you wipe it clean. And for the first time in what feels like forever, you see your own face. Not the version they painted. Not the shape you contorted into. But the original, raw, unperformed, undeniable. This is the moment Jung called reconciliation with the self, when the ego steps out of costume and meets the soul without disguise. And what you feel isn't pride, it's grief. Because you see now how far you had to go just to get back here. But you also feel something else, power. Not the kind they feared, not control, not domination, but sovereignty. You are no longer gasping for space in someone else's narrative. You are writing your own. And every word comes from the voice they tried to erase. This is soul retrieval, not poetic theory, actual integration. The parts of you that splintered to survive are coming home. And with them comes the memory of who you've always been, before the script, before the edits, before the maze. You don't run anymore, you walk. Through every room they told you to avoid, and you reclaim them, one breath at a time. You thought the door was locked, but it never was. They just convinced you it was unsafe to knock. Now you know better. And now you're not just knocking, you're walking through. And you're not looking back. When you live long enough in someone else's illusion, the truth doesn't come back like sunlight. It comes back like fire, burning away everything that isn't yours. Carl Jung believed the self, the true unified self, is not something you become, it's something you uncover. And the path to it always runs through shadow. You've walked that path. You've crawled through the fog. You've stood trial in your own dreams. You've been exiled from your own certainty. And now on the other side you see clearly. Not everything, but enough. Enough to know that love is not measured by how much of yourself you're willing to lose. Enough to know that silence is not peace when it costs your sanity. Enough to know that the voice in your head that called you crazy was never yours to begin with. And now you don't beg to be believed, you believe yourself. You don't debate your memories like they're theories. You don't perform your emotions like they're auditions. You don't walk into rooms wondering if you're too much, because you were never too much. You were surrounded by people who made themselves small and punished you for staying whole. This is sovereignty. It isn't loud, it isn't vengeance. It's quiet, it's clear, it's yours. You still carry the scars, but now they shine. Like gold poured into the cracks, like kintsugi. Each one a reminder, not of where you broke, but of where you healed with intention. You're no longer apologizing for being hard to manipulate. You're no longer softening your truth so someone else doesn't choke on their denial. You are no longer asking, am I remembering this right? You are stating, this happened. I felt it, I know, and if they disagree, that's not your burden, that's their shadow. And you've stopped carrying it. You used to call that distance cold. Now you call it clarity. You used to call that silence guilt. Now you call it peace. You used to call yourself broken. Now you call yourself home. And if you ever doubt again, and you will, because trauma isn't linear and healing isn't perfect, just remember your ability to question yourself was never the problem. It was your greatest strength, because it means your truth matters enough to protect. And now you're protecting it, with boundaries, with voice, with fire. They declared war on your reality. But you won. You didn't just survive their version of you, you erased it. And in its place, you wrote your name in something no one can edit, no one can shrink, no one can erase. You. Still here, still whole, and finally undeniable.